This stay at home that we're living through is not only offering a planetary rebooting, it is also offering us the amazing opportunity to really focus on the workings of our minds. Without many of our usually distractions at hand, we can actually observe the habitual patterns that we engage in. And we can take this as an opportunity to restructure the way we think and respond to challenges. It could be just like a retreat opportunity. And of course, you will be saying, okay, this is not a retreat. I'm not in silence. I'm living with many people in my home. So if you are in the company of a partner or a person who pushes your buttons, much the better. That person is at the moment our best teacher, our guru in a way. He or she is showing us precisely where we need to work on ourselves, where our triggers lie, where we are provoked. And we can start to see our emotional addictions, which is what I would like to explore today. Emotional addictions. So, one of the perennial questions we human beings have been asking for millennia is what causes happiness and suffering, right? And what is the root of suffering so we can have less of it in our lives? And what is the root of happiness so we can experience more of it? Well, the Buddhist teachings help so much in this search because they are a contemplation on understanding the workings of our minds, not an intellectual or conceptual level, but as a living experience. In other words, an understanding that we have the power to change our brains. And not only our brains, but our emotions and behaviors. They give us guidelines, like a roadmap on how to do that. Traditionally, what is said in the Buddhist teachings is that the root of suffering is ignorance, and that the root of happiness is or lies in dissolving that ignorance. Now, you may ask, what are we ignorant of? We are actually ignorant, the teachings say, of the true nature of our experience, which is so ingrained in a fixed and solid way of thinking, an inflexibility in perceiving our reality. The teachings tell us that the true nature of our experience is always in process, it's always flexible and very, very fluid. It is impermanent, and it is our rigid patterns that lead to the experience of being emotionally stuck. And for me, this is so inspiring because, we know that there are guidelines we can try to change our propensities. And we also know that everything changes. Nothing stays the same. It is very common for people to wonder why they have been experiencing the same emotions for a long time. And this is a universal experience. I'm sure it has happened to you. And if it hasn't, you will go through it at some point in your life, where we may feel, stuck and feel anxiety or the stress and the sadness, the hopelessness that we have been feeling for a long time. And we feel that we cannot change. So how is that possible, that we cannot really change when all we want is to change, you may wonder? Well, we all have a tendency to certain emotions. And the more we feel them, the more we strengthen our predisposition to that emotion. And the emotion could be stress or fear or anxiety, even anger, or a predisposition to reactivity, to irritability, to impatience, sadness, jealousy, envy, you name it. And like we explored last Tuesday, emotions begin with a thought. Every thought predisposes us to an emotion. And as we discussed, we have thousands of thoughts a day. The research suggests that we have between 60,000 and 95,000 thoughts a day, depending on how active your mind is. Science is also telling us that 95% of those thoughts are repeated thoughts, are thoughts that you are recycling day after day. It is very likely that we have the same thought that produces the same emotion many, many times a day. Take resentment, for example. Um, uh, Maybe you have been feeling resentful towards a person for months or even years, and you are like that because you haven't become curious, perhaps, about um, uh, changing the way you see the situation. Um, we have this inflexibility, we have this fixed way of thinking about certain things. But that is a topic we will explore in another talk. In the meantime, that thought that you have day after day that um, eh, has led to resentment has become a habit which produces the same emotion, resentment or sadness or anxiety, day after day. And we assume that these thoughts are true, and we assign meaning to these thoughts. We don't question our thoughts, and we do not separate them from our emotions. It is the interpretation of our thoughts that create our emotions. And because we have them day after day after day, there will come a point when our physiology, our body makeup, will get so used to these emotions that it will be very difficult to change them. We can call them, or we can call this process emotion addiction or emotional addiction. So why does that emotion become an addiction? Well, because every thought that produces an emotion affects our whole body, including our brain. Every time we feel an emotion, two chemical substances are released into our body, neurotransmitters and hormones. Neurotransmitters are especially proteins and amino acids that go from one neuron to the next. And hormones are released um, uh, are released into our bloodstream, and they are produced in our endocrine glands, and they are secreted into our bloodstream, like the stress hormones, cortisol, glucocorticoids, hydrocortisone, prednisolone, all these stress hormones. And some hormones also function as neurotransmitters, like, say, oxytocin or dopamine or serotonin, for example. And some neurotransmitters function as hormones. They circulate in our bloodstream. So these two chemical substances called the physiology, that is the makeup of our body, to shift. And as our physiology shifts, the neural connections in the brain fire and wire, and in response to those changes, and they reinforce those neural pathways. It's like every time we repeat an emotion or an action, we are strengthening the habit because we are reinforcing the neural connections in the brain. And repetition creates habits. It's estimated that it takes around 10,000 repetitions to master a skill and develop the associated neural pathway. So imagine we have been repeating the same emotion for so long that if we have 60,000 to 90,000 thoughts a day, 10,000 times, of repetitions, doesn't really take that long for that emotion to be reinforced, right? So it's similar. Imagine you have a summer house in the woods close to a lake. And because you walk from the house to the lake every single day, you will create a path which you will maintain by walking it every single day or every day, right? This analogy applies to the neural pathways in your brain as well. So feeling our emotions and reacting to them habitually strengthens neural pathways, as I just said, and we will crave the chemical substances that they release, which is why paradoxically we will unconsciously seek situations that will cause the same emotion day after day. It's so interesting that we would subconsciously set up situations which would lead us to experience precisely those emotions that we want to avoid. So, an emotional addiction or emotion addiction is when the body becomes dependent on our own chemical responses. This is the way it works. A thought sends a message to the brain, to a nucleus in the middle of the limbic system in the temporal lobe called the amygdala. Remember that we discussed this in the last um, class on Tuesday, and I explained the hand model of the brain, and we talked about the amygdala being the nucleus in the limbic system where very strong emotions like fear, anxiety, rage generate. So if the amygdala interprets your thinking as an alarm to a possible danger, the amygdala will start sending electrical signals to the endocrine glands, and a cascade of hormones will fill your entire body with stress hormones, mainly adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. What happens next is that our body gets used to that hormonal flow and wants more and more and more. It works the same way as addiction to alcohol, drugs, or sex, gambling, or any other addiction. And this cycle changes the reward center of the brain process. I am very, very familiar with this process because as a child, I grew up in an environment with a lot of stress and anxiety. As a result, my body got used to the stress hormone flow that contributed to that state of anxiety. And because the environment, that stressful environment prevailed, it became the normal baseline emotion for my body. And the stress or a background hum of anxiety became the emotion that I felt most of the time. We usually think of an addiction as something related to an external substance or practice, like drugs or, like I said before, gambling. But we can be addicted to our own internal chemical cocktails. Remember, we have a pharmacy in our bodies. Emotional addiction is very different from an external addiction because we are experiencing our emotions so closely. It is literally beyond our scope of awareness sometimes. So we are experiencing the emotion and we're totally involved, totally lost in that emotion. So in order to break our emotional addiction, we have to become conscious to our own ingrained patterns. Like, for instance, one of the emotions that is the most common one that I see in most of my clients is anxiety. And some people feel a lot of anxiety, and so they want to do and fill up their schedule, their calendar with a lot of activities, and um, a lot has happened now with this pandemic, with this situation, that perhaps their calendars are not so filled with activities, but they are looking for they are looking in they are trying to schedule more and more activities because their bodies are craving those hormones. So on one side they want to get away from that anxiety, but on the other side on the other hand, they are looking for activities that will um, that will cause the flow of stressful hormones their body is used to. So we are, once we are addicted to an emotion, we become desensitized to it. So which means that our body, specifically our brain, needs a higher and higher dose of those hormones that our body produces, just like what happens with drugs. So you don't understand all of a sudden why you are um, seeking, or your brain is focusing on those activities that are causing you that very emotion that you are trying to avoid. It's very interesting to know that we have a structure in our brain that is called the reticular activating system. It is like a brain filter. And this structure has the function of filtering and discriminating all the information that we receive moment by moment. Just imagine the thousands of pieces of information we receive moment by moment. It would be so difficult to focus on everything, right? Like, for example, I have a wall full of books here in my office that I am looking at. And I have the lamps and many other things on my desk. And if my brain had to focus on everything at the same time, it would be very, very difficult for me to make sense of my environment and to focus on everything, right? So the reticular activating system has the function of deciding what is important to me and what is not important to me. It filters the information I receive. And that is what happens to everybody that is alive, every human person. So since I was used to feeling stress in my childhood home, as I was telling you, and for me it was the normal way of being, what this filter thought was that I needed more stress to feel normal. And as a result, this filter began to focus and choose all the stressful experiences that I had around me, and I began to absorb them. So naturally, my mind went to everything that was stressful. And I navigated life focusing more on what gave me that feeling of stress and that feeling of anxiety. There came a time when I realized that in my daily life, I was reacting by becoming impatient instead of responding to very, very common, inevitable, perhaps even annoying incidents of everyday life, like not finding the car keys, or being stuck in traffic, or waiting in line, or listening to somebody speak about a topic I was not interested about. I was reacting to those situations instead of actually responding to them. My mind was so used to panic and chaos in my childhood home that I didn't realize that that level of stress continued in my body way after I had left my childhood home, and it continued in my body and in my mind throughout the years into my 20s and my 30s. So how can we break this pattern of behavior? So I was thinking that I would like to give you 5 invitations, 5 steps that I will call them 5 invitations for you to try. And the first one is, of course, to bring awareness to what you think and do, to be able to break the autopilot tendency that your body is used to, so you can choose better. It is observing yourself as if you were watching a third person, perhaps in the middle of your reactivity, catching yourself and saying something to yourself, like in the moment that I used to lose my keys and I would get all worked up, I would say to myself when I noticed it, you know, Monica, they're just keys. You will find them. Calm down and respond without reacting. So at first, that reflection will come in retrospect. That is, after having reacted disproportionately to the incident of losing the keys, for example. So as time goes by, you will start noticing that you are reacting in the middle of the event, right when you are reacting, and then you will observe yourself and you will stop yourself right then and there. It takes just a couple of seconds to do that. And as you practice and progress in this process, you will be able to notice that you are about to react before you do it. And instead of going ahead and acting on these emerging emotions, you will be able to reflect, feel it in your body, and don't do it. And you will be so happy about it when that happens. So one thing that we really need to do is we need to question our thoughts. So remember that the thought is what creates an emotion. So when the thought comes, ask yourself, are these thoughts contributing to my well-being? Or is this thought I'm having creating connection with others and giving me more freedom? Or is it undermining my well-being by creating a sense of separation, perhaps a sense of being deficient, or a sense of that I'm not good enough? When you see these options, then you can choose. And you are creating radical change in consciousness. So the first invitation is to watch your thoughts and not believe every thought that suddenly pops into your head. Observe your thoughts and notice the impact that those thoughts have in the way you feel in your body and the way your emotions evolve. So that's the first invitation. Now, the second invitation is to pause. And it might seem like a very simple thing, but believe it or not, a pause is a radical act. In that short pause, you are creating some space. And in that space, you can achieve balance by returning to the present moment, to the here and now, to connect to your own body, because your body is always living in the present. And how do you do this? Well, you do this, you can pause by choosing an anchor. And an anchor is something that brings you back to the here and now. Like the meditation we did today about, meditating on your breath. Your breath can be your anchor. You observe your breath, how you're inhaling and exhaling, and that brings you back to center. Sounds could also be a great anchor. You can concentrate or focus on the sounds around you, or your body. You can notice your hands, for instance, or any part of your body. And this sounds easy, but it's very difficult. We have been training our brains for decades to these addictive emotions, and now we're trying to soothe them. We're trying to create an atmosphere of peace and calm that our body and our brains can get used to. So naturally, we will experience a lot of resistance. The brain will want to go back to what it is used to. It will take intentionality to stand your ground. We want to make calmness to be our normal baseline, our normal state, but it will be tough initially. However, every round counts. And if you practice day after day, the results will surprise you. So, because it's so difficult, pausing is difficult. The third invitation is to acknowledge the experience you are having with a quality of gentleness, of tenderness, and a lot of compassion. Knowing that it won't be easy right away, that it will take many rounds until we find it easier, but we keep on trying, because it's only by finding what is here and now in the present moment with equanimity, with calm, that we will find our true power and our freedom from these unpleasant emotions that keep us in prison. So the fourth invitation is to meditate. Put a few minutes aside a day to observe and train your mind. Why? Because it is in the stillness of meditation that you can get valuable feedback on the loops of your thoughts, which trigger the emotions you are feeling. This is so important to strengthen. It is so important to strengthen the patterns you would like to cultivate. And you do that by training your mind. That is, when you sit down and you start meditating, you decide on what anchor you will focus, and say it is the brain. So you decide you will be observing your brain. But if you have ever meditated, you know already that a few seconds into the meditation, your brain starts drifting off, and maybe you're carried away by your thoughts. Don't think that you're a bad meditator because that is what is happening to you. Just bring awareness to the fact that, oh, you have been lost in a thought, or you are lost in a thought. Acknowledge that thought, and with no judgment, come back to your breath and continue meditating. And you will be doing that over and over and over. And every time you notice that your mind has drifted, is a moment of victory, is a moment of success, because you have woken up from being lost in thought. So every time you do that, you're teaching your brain that you are the one controlling it, instead of you controlling you being controlled by your brain, right? And then we come to the fifth invitation. The fifth invitation is to be more aware of nutrition too. Nutrition is very important. Remember that the brain is primarily fat, and there is constant bi-directional communication between the brain and your gut. And that communication is called the gut-brain axis, with hormones and neurotransmitters and fluids. Now, since neurotransmitters like serotonin, which is crucial for diminishing depression, science thinks. So neurotransmitters like serotonin are primarily made in the gut. So food is essential therapy for a healthy brain. You need good, healthy fat. So removing processed foods. Try not to eat out of boxes. You know, removing sugar from your diet, not the sugar from food, from fruits, for example, because that's very healthy, but any added sugar, and replacing them with nutrient dense foods like vegetables and fruits and meats and uh, perhaps yogurt and kefir and dairy if you can tolerate it, and also adding or cooking with coconut oil or extra virgin olive oil and eating eggs. All that has very, very healthy, the type of healthy fat that the brain needs. So, so the 5 invitations then is to raise awareness and to check your thoughts, right? To become aware of your thoughts and not believe them, to pause, to bring or to meet your experience, the experience of having an emotional urge, perhaps, with gentleness and compassion, to meditate, to train your mind, your brain, and watch your nutrition. And as I said before, it is very normal to expect resistance. The brain needs or tends to perpetuate old habits. So it's hard at the beginning to change the ingrained patterns. However, the brain also has this amazing capacity to change itself that is called neuroplasticity. Whatever we are experiencing at any moment changes the structure of your brain. So whatever we think, we become. Remember that also. We are reinforcing any emotional experience we repeatedly have. So say you complain a lot. The more you complain, the more you will tend to complain. And that happens with anger. It happens with sadness, with anxiety. Because over time, that feeling becomes a baseline for how you respond to your life, to the world. If anger is your default emotion, you might find yourself turning to anger, becoming angry whenever you are meeting a challenge or whenever you are uncertain of something. So remember, we have the power to change and to create new new experiences. We have that power. But to meet that power, we need to pause. So, because it's only in a pause that we have the option of choosing a different path, right? So, one thing also is cultivating um, a lot of gratitude for this capacity that we have of awareness and move forward, focusing on the abundance and the beauty and the magic that we have in life. We might think that the things that we are experiencing every day, like walking or being able to see, we don't reflect on those things enough. But it's only when we lose those capacities that we know how valuable they are. Let's not wait till we lose the health that we have in our body or the blessings in our life to become thankful for them. And let's cultivate gratitude now, while we are experiencing those blessings. And just as we become emotionally addicted to anxiety or to sadness, we also have the capacity to experience very pleasant and wonderful emotions most of the time. So if you practice gratitude and compassion and kindness, you will be creating a balanced physiological environment in your body that will downregulate those unpleasant emotions, and homeostasis will take place. And homeostasis is that balance that we all know, that leads to healing. And that is when healing starts. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for listening to this talk.